One, please jot down your questions for all the faculties that will be presenting up to lunch, because we will only be having Q&As or discussions after all, from the floor side now, after all the faculties have made their presentations. So without further ado, and for the sake of brevity, I will now hand over to Prof. May and the Faculty of Business and Economic Sciences. Thank you. And her team, of course. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone, and welcome from the Faculty of Business and Economic Sciences. As a faculty, we've hosted several events and discussions and breakfast clubs on the topic of artificial intelligence and the role it plays in industry and in education and in society. And we also have several interventions in our faculty with regards to bringing Africa back into the curriculum. So when this opportunity came about, I was being deliberately provocative to say, how do we bring Africa back into our curriculum in an ever-changing artificial intelligence world? And today I have with me as part of my panel, Professor Grant Friedman, who heads up our portfolio at the business school in terms of executive education, but has also got a passion for artificial intelligence and has been instrumental in signing a MOU with AfDeP, and you'll see a video on them a little later, or he'll discuss it a little later. And then I have Dr. Asanda Fotoy, who has done research and written papers and book chapters on bringing Africa back into our curriculum as an economist. I can never say that, thanks. So my first question to the panel, and I'm just here as the panel leader. So my question to the panel is, Grant, explain to us how AI is showing up in industry, in society, and in academia, please.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I guess it wouldn't be a good time for me not to be au fait with the technology now, hey? Particularly given the topic. So thank you. I want to perhaps use some more of the technology just to show you visually and talk to a couple of ways in which we are, through work in industry and here at the university, and particularly the business school, seeing AI show up in industry and in society, and of course then in academia as well. So just a quick look at AI. AI has got, we're calling almost everything AI these days, and it's very exciting and it's very scary in many ways and so on. But if you, and I'm looking now at the industry, world of work perspective here, and how we work from a human perspective has got the four elements there. We see certain things with our eyes, obviously. We communicate through language. We do certain things, and then we learn about what we're doing. And so the AI attempts to replicate that in a couple of ways. So you have a computer vision component, so that's the use of these cameras that have the tremendous resolution and you know can see a cigarette butt on the surface of the moon and things like that, and can also then zoom down to very microscopic levels and help doctors at the microscopic level and so on with tolerances and in places that we can't get to. Then, of course, and you'll understand, and with the advent of these generative AI large language models that have come out, like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and so on, the ability to understand and predict language and to talk. And if you've been using the Google Assistants and Siris and things as well, so to be able to understand and increasingly to become adept at translating languages, which will have a great impact on the world of work and on the world of education. So that technology, and it has gone extremely rapidly in the last little bit. And of course, then there's a lot of task automation, using machines to take risk out, to take to speed up processes, increase quality, and so on there. And the last one, and of course, this is where we're seeing huge acceleration now, is that machines, for the first time, are not just what we are creating and using, but machines that can learn and develop and build themselves and build other things and so on. And so the machine learning part. So talking about AI, it's all of those aspects together. So it's not just ChatGPT. There's a whole whack of other things that are going to come together in this world that's going to impact on what we need to do as educators and what we need to do as Africa to be right up there and relevant. So there's just one more point on AI tools. When is a tool an AI tool? If it can offer you prediction, so you know that you can ask ChatGPT questions and it answers by accessing its learning, what it was trained on, and then trying to predict what the next word would be. And because it's been trained on so many things, it can then quite accurately predict and create that. It can learn. We spoke about self-learning. It can recognize patterns that we cannot because we can't cope with the amount of data and so on. And you remember the old Google? You'd ask it and it would give you a list of potentially you can find an answer there or there or there or there, a whole lot of hits. You go find the answer. Now it's starting to give you answers. And we're seeing the advent now of things like AI agents that are very specialized in certain things that will specialize in medicine or whatever and give you very, very detailed answers around that. So it was important to say that. So one of the things that we wanted to show you is just a very short clip around what is happening in industry with AI, with computer vision, language processing, pattern recognition, all of that coming together. And here's a very short clip of local manufacturing and a local company that you'll see there. They have a workbench and they are using computer vision and AI to guide employees on how to put together an engine in the quickest, most accurate way possible. And the implications of this you will see for how we teach people, what we teach them, and the nature of work are quite important. So I'm just going to play it quickly.
It could be done by barcode scan, as I'm going to do over here. What it's now done is actually identified the variant. It's now telling me the next steps to do. It's telling me that I can actually go pick components, but you see it doesn't work unless I've actually got the safety gloves on. So this is one way we can ensure that our PPE is being used correctly. So once I've got the gloves on, it's obviously telling me that I can pick the component off the bin. If I go into the wrong bin, it starts flashing red, telling me that I'm in the wrong bin. If I go to the right bin, it obviously tells me I've picked the right part. So then it's telling me very clearly on the screen to fit the first bolt. I'm going to fit the first bolt and then press the virtual button. As you can see, it's actually not a physical button, it's actually a virtual button. We're using computer vision to determine the position of my finger over that virtual button. It's now telling me to fit the second bolt, which I'm going to do. Press the virtual button, and then it's going to tell me to pick a different kind of bolt from the second bin. Detected that, it's telling me exactly where to put it, and I can put it in the right position. Then press the virtual complete button. What it's now telling me to do is obviously pick the right socket, and as you can see, I've got two options of socket. I need to pick socket 1, it's telling me socket 1. If I pick the wrong socket, it detects that, and it's actually not telling me, it's not allowing the station to continue. So it's kind of like a digital pokey-yoke. Once I pick the right socket, it detects that, and obviously I need to put the socket onto the bolting tool, and then I can move the bolting tool into position. Important to note here is that the bolting tool is completely disabled, and I need to go to the right position in order to enable the bolting tool. So the yellow flashing light is telling me where to go. If I go to the wrong position, it's completely disabled. Only when I go into the right position, it goes solid blue, and then I'm able to tighten the bolt. And if I pull out of the position, the bolting tool is completely disabled, and I failed the bolt. Obviously, then when I go back into position, it detects that and allows me to actually continue. And
So, and I've cut it there because it's just an illustration of how here locally with homegrown, these are our own people here, Gendermark up the road, creating and exporting this kind of technology and leading the interface between humans and machines and AI. So, for example, the cameras that they're using there are not multi-billion-dollar cameras and whatever. They're the normal desktop webcams that we use here, but that can help our people to do the work easier, quicker, faster, more accurately, higher quality, and so on, and teach us to work with, and they call it cobotting. Humans will soon begin work with robots. How we do that better. You can see the implications for how we train people, for how we recruit them, and for how we work in that. And I don't want to keep going on that for too much. Here's a particular application of similar kind of technology in education. I think you probably are aware of this and how this particular application was made available in the rural areas in schools to help people learn using obviously technology and AI, but kind of low bandwidth technology. You don't need 750,000 megabits a second to get that to go.
By connecting pupils in underprivileged schools to the ODIN ecosystem in rural and urban communities, ODIN is providing access to unlimited digital learning systems and resources. The ODIN Among tablet is a dedicated learning device with 24/7 connectivity, giving pupils access to hundreds of online e-learning platforms. The ODIN ecosystem is safe and secure. And powered by AI technology, the adaptive learning system delivers a customized learning path for each pupil at the right time, nurturing and developing individual skills, talents, and capabilities, with a complete communication system, including access to community groups and mentors. ODIN is reinventing sustainable education, developing resilient and agile young adults who have a better sense of their future in an uncertain world.
So we're seeing a lot of that, and for the real youngsters these days, these things all come built on social platforms and integrated gaming and whatever that gets them interested in it, and the personalization that they can get. So you become almost a customer of one, a learner of one, which has advantages and disadvantages. So I'm not going to show you 700 other videos, just talk about a couple of things that we're involved with right here. A 3D more there, you can see Nela Nokele. She started as a mechanical engineer and has won awards for her biotech and animal husbandry work, where they use sensors and that to monitor the health of livestock and that, and how they are doing and how they are eating and so on, to improve farming, for example, in difficult areas. Michelle spoke about AfDeP and our collaboration partners that we are working with at the business school at the moment, where they have created glasses that assist visually impaired people to see. So they are there using the computer vision technology plus the language technology and whatever, so that a person who has never seen their partner wearing these will now look at that and get a description of that, or would say this person is, these things are getting smart. They can recognize emotions, they can and describe, and so they can get first-hand descriptions of that, and besides which now they can learn and read not only in Braille. You can actually take a book and it will read it to you. So it is really quite an innovative thing. We've got drone farming. Of course, in the mining industry, there's quite a lot around automated sending, where you don't want to send people into the stopes 3 and 4 kilometers underground, where it's very, very, humans shouldn't be working there. You can now send the automated technology in there. We've also seen, and it's a very weird feeling, to be interviewed by an AI agent and psychometrically profiled in terms of your personality. It's getting that good. They use facial action coding to tell you what you're thinking and feeling. Quite accurate. We are doing some interesting research on the validity and reliability of that at the moment, but those things are already available in South Africa by South African inventors and whatever. In the medical world, you can imagine around improving patient care. And then the next, one of the other things that we see coming up a lot is using AI in the legal world and in many areas to analyze contracts, to find loopholes in contracts, to advise you, and so on. So, and there are many, many more, just a couple that I wanted to show you there. Where's it all heading?
Let's leave that one for the next time.
Okay.
So I saw all our legal eagles wake up quickly when you said advised by AI. But my one question, even though we aren't supposed to ask questions, is that person smoking on the moon. We need to identify that person. Okay, because of their cigarette butt, just by the way. Asanda, my question to you is, what's the importance of curriculum ideology in the context of decolonizing education?
Good. Is it still morning? Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Prof. Thanks for the question. Very important question. I think all of us here in the Indaba, we all agree that our education in the African continent is still more colonial, right? So that's why we're having these discussions. And we cannot talk about decolonizing education without talking about or considering curriculum ideology. So by curriculum ideology, we're talking about a set of beliefs, that we apply when we are answering the question of what are the aims of all the subjects that we teach, be it basic education, be it higher education. Can I continue? Oh, okay, cool. So basically, when we're talking aims, we're talking about the outcomes of the objectives of the different subjects that we teach. So another question that comes to mind, when we're talking about curriculum ideology, is the actual content knowledge. So what is it that we're actually teaching? Does the content that we present in our subject, is it integrated into our African lived experiences, or is it still more informed by the colonial ideology and colonial education that we're trying to move away from? Third question is actually the learning process. How should the content be presented, in class? How do we engage students? What is the role of, students in the learning process? Also, what is the role of the teacher? Does the teacher uphold, these certain beliefs? Have we agreed on a certain beliefs that we term curriculum ideology towards decolonizing education? Other students part and parcel of that vision? Do they uphold it? Do the teachers also uphold that vision, and also in their interactions with the students? And lastly, how are the assessments presented to the students? Because that also is part of curriculum ideology. So in essence, curriculum ideology is very important, and the most important thing is identifying those beliefs that would uphold in our education system in all our subjects, and as part of decolonizing our education.
Thanks, Asanda. Grant, in your opinion, what are the challenges we face with regards to AI in education?
So very quickly this time. Some of the big, some of the major, or what I've called macro challenges, are around leading into what Asanda just said, or leading from there, is what is our ideological position with regard to AI and the way we want to integrate it and use it from an African perspective. That's the key thing, and it's part of a bigger debate that we need there. And then, of course, once we get this, we've been the bullet train of AI has left the station. We are going to have to then put together a strategy, as I said there, with humility, but strong professional will that we are going to then follow whatever position we come up with as Africans on this. And then, of course, there are questions of funding and infrastructure and connectivity and dealing with our resource constraints that we've got here. So that's what I would see as the macro challenges. And then there are a myriad of micro challenges. How do we prepare students for the disrupted future, jobs changing all the time? How do we get people to collaborate with colleagues that are not human for the first time? So there are many in there. How do we keep the human and take some of the robot out of the human, for example? A number of challenges around that we'll face.
Thanks. Colleagues that are not human, okay? We will not name and shame. Asanda, what are the challenges we face in wanting to decolonize or Africanize our teaching and learning?
The main challenge that I've, from the research that you said I've done, I think it's agreeing on the anchor, of our curriculum ideology. For example, what is this vision or this agenda that we all, as Africans, agree on and we want to incorporate in, our teaching and learning towards decolonizing, our education? For example, the apartheid government was very clear, and they had an agenda of which was apartheid, and in terms of the aims of
continue with our discussion, obvious demonstration of protests going on outside.
It is quite disruptive.
Hi everyone. As you can hear, there are some students here. I believe they are protesting, I think, around mostly accommodation. Prof. Kiet and the VC are busy addressing it. So if we could just, we'll report back as soon as we can. But we're just trying to address the situation and the students' challenges. Okay. It seems to be a bit more quiet now, so if you do want to continue, you're welcome to. If we all just want to have a moment. If we all just want to have a moment to chill, that's also fine. And then we'll see where we're at. So thank you. As you know, we have, as Prof. Kiet mentioned in his opening speech, we have some challenges in the university. So here they are in action.
You can continue. I think it's much more quiet now.
Okay, so it's a lot quieter for now. So let us try and continue. So if I can just, we're going to wrap up very soon anyway. So Sanda is just really summarizing the challenges which we face when wanting to decolonize or Africanize our teaching and learning.
Yes. So as I was saying, I think, where we are really struggling is having that, curriculum ideology anchor. By anchor, I mean the vision or the agenda. For example, if we say that we all agree on the African Renaissance agenda, right? Then how do we then, incorporate that in the aims of all the subjects that we teach, right? Whether it's AI, whether it's economics, whether it's, social work and so forth. How do we then incorporate the agenda of the African Renaissance in the content? And how do we, for example, the textbooks that we prescribe, how do we ensure that, they are aligned with the African Renaissance agenda? How do we ensure that, the learning process is aligned with the African Renaissance agenda? How do we ensure that, the students are made consciously aware of their role, for example, as change agents in the African content? How do we ensure that, the teachers themselves, first of all, are we taught about the African Renaissance agenda? And then how do we uphold that vision in class? How do we also, how does it also come up in the assessments that we give to our students? So I think That's where, for me, that's what's missing. We've been having this conversation of, decolonizing education in the African continent, and I think really what's missing is this anchor that we all agree on, and that we all are willing to champion forward.
Thanks, Asanda. Okay, I know my timekeepers have been giving me the eye, and I'm trying not to make eye contact, but anyway. So what I'm hoping for in our panel discussion at the end, after the next two panels, is that we actually have a discussion as to, with this background that Grant and Asanda has provided in terms of AI and the curriculum, how do we put Africa back into our curriculum within an AI world that's out there? Right, so I leave that thought with you. Thank you very much for listening, even though we did arrange some music for you in the background.
Thank you so much. My take away for the Faculty of Business and Economic Sciences session, industry.
Can I request that you be careful with the language that we use here?
Thank you.
Okay? So what we're hearing are the voices that BBC Jack said, that these are societal matters. This is not music. These are voices of people that are experiencing discomfort because of the historical and contemporary challenges. So I want to caution us, even as we are trying to facilitate the resolution in the room, let us at least be mindful in what we are doing.
Thank you, Dr. Darmons, for conscientizing us. Thank you. My take home is industry, AI, curriculum, vis-a-vis our fears that presents us within the mainstream academia. How do we then trump the two, fears of plagiarism and all those things? That's my take home from this session. And the issue of the learning process in a continuously ever evolving academic space, and with the introduction of AI now, introducing that evolution. How then do we contextualize all these together and make sense of it as we, in our journey of being a transformative university, of being a decolonial in character and posture university as we move forward. So that being said, Prof. Masego is there. I want us to then recharge ourselves, prepare ourselves. Sorry, thank you so much, Rob. As Debbie Dupreez is here and the science team, I want us to reorient ourselves. Try to come back to the scene as I hand over to the science panel, Debbie Dupreez and Prof. Chenti, as they come join us. Thank you so much.
Can I call the rest of our panel up to please come join us as well? Thank you so much. There's 5 seats up here, Zeni. Come and join us. Thank you. A bit short. Okay. Thank you. So we picked the topic of text and practice in the imagination of a decolonial natural science and resource management education. We have the more natural sciences on this side of the stage and our resource management colleagues on the other side from George. And this is very much about a work in progress. So what have we implemented? How do we see it working? And where would we like to ultimately end up? Although even where we end up is very much a moving target, because things do change as new knowledge is created. How do we add it to our curriculum and adapt to what our students need? Okay. So what we found in this discussion about how to decolonialize and Africanize our curriculum was very much about, can we use the localization of our curriculum as a mechanism for Africanization? How and where can we interact with indigenous knowledge systems? Can we use problem-based learning and experiential learning in our curricula? And where and how can we bring in South African and local literature. So where is that already implemented? And we have some case studies from our departments where we're going to discuss that. But just to start off with, what is our South African and local literature and where can we use it? And we do have some excellent examples of literature about our South African context, our natural systems, what we have, and it is used very much in our curriculum. However, there are certain subjects where there isn't this kind of literature for our context available. So mostly at the moment, departments and lecturers supplement with their own class notes. Is there a way for us, though, to formalize that knowledge and make it more broadly available? And if we do that, how do we deal with the always present issue of the expense of our students accessing that kind of literature? Okay. So one of our case study departments is the Department of Zoology, and this is a case where we have tried to use the localization of our curricula as a method of Africanization. So there are many universal topics in zoology which are globally accepted and referred to, but there are several modules in this subject that are specific to our not only South African context, but our Eastern Cape context. So our students learn and often interact very practically with our particular Eastern Cape systems, which does mean that they are then very well set up to go and work in the Eastern Cape. So as a method to provide local knowledge, which then can assist in our local context, it does work very well. But potentially it can be an issue where we are limiting our students with a sort of global interaction. It does help in that we can now really start working on publishing and expanding on our local knowledge, and our students can go off and present their research further abroad. We have found that some international students who come and do a bit of our biology here, though, are sometimes a bit stuck because they're coming from a very different context, and because this is so specific to our Eastern Cape environment, they're lacking some of the practical experience that our students have that does help them a great deal. So as nice as localization is, because we can have such a good interaction with our environment, it can potentially have a downside. So I think finding a balance along that line is potentially quite an important issue to bear in mind. Okay. So our next sort of case study is agricultural sciences, and I'm going to invite Dr. Kapai up to talk about incorporating indigenous knowledge systems. You want to say that? Sure.
So, in the department, what we mostly focus on is incorporating indigenous knowledge systems into scientific knowledge. One of the challenges that we have found with our students is that they cannot relate to what they are being taught in the classroom because it's not what is being practiced back at home. Most of our students are coming from the rural areas where subsistence farming is practiced. And some of the agricultural practices that we are teaching them about, even though they are modern agricultural practices, they have been adapted from foreign practices, which are not necessarily what they are practicing back at home. So we had to adapt to that and teach them about agriculture in the South African context. One of the challenges that we are faced with is that gap that exists between scientific knowledge and your indigenous knowledge. We all know that indigenous knowledge is always associated with taboos, some of the practices that are practiced where they are farming back at home. For example, to control pesticides and also to control pests and diseases. In scientific knowledge, we use pesticides because they have been tested, trials have been done. But subsistence farmers in rural areas, they use urine sometimes, which is associated with taboos, and it is not accepted with the good agricultural practices, which is some of the conversations that I have with my colleagues, that although we are capacitating in terms of agricultural practices, our farmers, subsistence farmers in particular, they need to still adhere to the good agricultural practices that are adapted to the European gap norms, which is a challenge for them to emerge to lucrative agricultural markets. So bridging that gap is by the department localizing the curriculum, adapting it within the South African context, our students being taught about the practices that are done at home, and the response has been positive because some of them, if I can make an example with soil sciences, when I came in, they were studying about soils from New Zealand, Australia, and so forth. And I said to the then HOD, our students cannot relate to the content. We need to change that completely. And we changed it, and we started teaching them about soils of South Africa. And when they come back to me, they say, whoa, what you taught us in class is what actually we are experiencing back at home. So I was able to apply the practical aspect and the theoretical aspect back at home, and the production improved. So thank you for that. Some of them will say, well, because you are teaching us about the practices that we can adapt back at home, we were able to make so much profit. So what can you advise that we do with the money? You know, sometimes you want to say, please give it to me. Or can I please invoice you? Yeah, so the response has been very, very positive, but the challenge still exists that there is that huge gap between scientific knowledge and indigenous knowledge systems. Thank you. So blending blending that, as I have said, is adapting the curriculum, because I believe that the students that we are teaching, they are the future farmers, and they are the ones that are going to contribute to food insecurity. And one of the other positive aspects about indigenous practices is that they are sustainable. So you are able to utilize the natural resources in a sustainable manner. Although one of the strengths with scientific knowledge is that quantity of food that is produced, I think that is where the gap still exists. I think that's it. Oh, okay. So it is important that we see indigenous knowledge systems and scientific knowledge as complementary sources of wisdom. So rather than isolating the two, they need to complement each other when they are delivered to our students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Musa. Can we hand over to Rhoda for some discussion about problem-based learning?
Sure. So I'll be talking from the George campus, where there's the School of Natural Resource Management, and my colleague Georgia and I are representing our colleagues here. So we got together a few weeks ago to discuss what our contribution to this meeting would be. And from our cluster, which includes forestry, agriculture and nature conservation, we actually started with a seminal question about what are we even talking about when we talk about decolonisation and Africanization. So I think my experience over the years is that it can mean many different things for many different peoples, and across the disciplines, even within the natural sciences, it can have different connotations. So we spent some time talking about that, and also raised the fact that I've seen in the literature, and I've also heard it in conversations, that people in the sciences say that people in humanities are better positioned to engage on the topic because you can go through a chemistry class, for instance, you could go through organic chemistry and a whole degree at a university without ever once thinking what you are learning about and why. And so those are some of the reasons that I think scientists have said have not been engaging, is because of this kind of narrative. But we did say that on the positive side, we are in Africa and we do our science in the natural sciences in habitats that are localized. So almost by default, the kind of science that we do is indeed localized. However, of course, the lenses at which we look at that landscape can be something different. So it's not automatic. A colleague in agriculture was talking about recent work for herself where she's dealing with indigenous crops and value chains. So rather than working on, let's say, wheat and canola in the Western Cape, also thinking about Bambara groundnuts or orchid species in Zambia, for instance, which is the work of one of my students. Then talking about localization with regard to environmental and local advancements, but also in technology and business, and this, one of the previous speaker, Friedman, was just referring to that, so I won't go into that any further. In forestry, one of our colleagues pointed out that there are actually homegrown schemes here in South Africa that changes the value chain for forestry. He was talking about how small-scale producers of forestry products are actually being invited into commercial forestry chains that had not been the case before. And that's entirely a South African and homegrown response to marginalization of stakeholders outside of the value chain before. And then our colleague here talked about indigenous knowledge. I don't think there's anything you said that I need to repeat there, but it's very similar to what you've said. But also talking about breeds, African breeds, Nguni cattle, fat-tailed sheep in the Northern Cape. So indigenous breeds for crops and livestock that can actually be positioned not only because they're indigenous, but actually because genetically they're also better adapted for the kinds of environmental challenges we face with climate change. But we also talked about how it's not in just the curriculum that decolonization shows up or in our classrooms, but also just in the presence of our being in the academe. Just yesterday in the car we were talking about our experiences at other universities, and now we're the ones who can write about, talk about, teach about the kinds of things that we're advocating for in these spaces. So the presence of people who had been excluded before in value chains, in the classroom, in higher education, in industry, because forestry in our case is quite hard driven by industry. So one could argue that accessibility in higher education and industry is already one outcome of a decolonization narrative in South Africa, and something that we continue on. Just as an example, a further example, we are currently engaged in an EU-funded project with colleagues in Norway and Finland. It's called Forestry 21, and it also includes other higher education institutions where forestry is taught. And the idea there is to expose our South African students to forestry students from the Scandinavian countries, but also for them to get exposure to our African students here, to learn about our context. And in fact, they're joining us in the middle of April for 2 weeks to come and learn together about forestry value chains across the world. So global exposure is another arm of decolonization, I would say. With problem-based learning, which is the particular pedagogical approach we're taking with this Forestry 21 project, we were discussing about, again, how even with problem-based learning, something that could be ontologically and epistemologically argued to be a step towards decolonization, it's not automatic. If you frame a project or frame a problem in a certain way, again, you can exclude people for whom the reality of the problem is very different. And I think the president of the SRC spoke to that earlier, where a student is facing a text, a paper, a problem, or how a problem is framed even, for something that is completely outside of how they would frame it themselves. And so even with the problem-based learning, we're taking quite a critical approach and saying that in problem-based learning, there's opportunity for the students even to frame the problems the way that they see it from their linguistic, cultural, environmental, biophysical context, and then also offer a response from that context. And it will be interesting for us to see how our Scandinavian colleagues do the same in this environment. So that's an example just from our cluster and some of the ways that we're trying to engage on the topic. And certainly, George and I have been talking about other engagements. There's opportunity even to talk to Dutch students about colonization history, which is interestingly and is perhaps the necessary thing. It can't just happen from an African perspective. The historically colonizing countries, I think, also have a role to play, especially in the natural sciences. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I hand over to Zeni to facilitate some discussion amongst the panel?
Thanks, Debbie, and of course thanks to the team for that discussion. I've learned over my years now as a human being on this earth that I shouldn't always romanticize science. I usually move from a very romanticized position and advocate for the good of science, for the world. But I've had to learn through other lenses that people view science differently. Some of the things that have happened around the world are actually attributed to us, your atomic bombs, your COVIDs. So I've learned to be, to approach certain things with certain contexts nowadays, which should, of course, find its way to our curriculum. Debbie, as we recurriculate, we need to bring this context and conscientize our young scientists how the world views science. Right, so for now, I'm just going to debate a bit with my colleagues. I know Prof. Kiet always talks about multiplicity of pathways, so I see my colleagues are posing the question of texts and practices here for natural and agricultural sciences. But I just want to probe a bit on this issue that we are already doing this and using local examples. I wonder if some voices and some lenses are missing in there, even some noses, because in science we also smell things. We create knowledge through smelling things. So I wonder if there are any missing knowledges in what we say is ripe, Debbie. No, I don't want you to. We might say this is ripe, this is all local content, and it has clarity in the way it's packaged. But I want us to interrogate, to question whether that might also need repackaging to include other of these voices and these other noses that see and smell things differently to how it's packaged now. Perhaps that will be my first question to the panelists. I think you are all fit for this question, actually. I'll start with you, Debbie, and then Rhoda. Are there any gaps in what we say is ripe that we are providing? Does it incorporate?
Does it incorporate everything? I think not. I think there are still a lot of gaps, and we are still in the process of even identifying where these gaps are. And the problem in that regard is new gaps do tend to open up. Conditions change. The environment is constantly changing. So how do we need to keep ourselves aware of where the new gaps are coming up and how we can best fill them? And then also thinking a lot towards how we can find resources to keep working on that. If we do want to create our own literature, do we have the capacity to do that? How can we potentially start working on that? Is there anybody who is already working on that? How can we collaborate with them?
Thanks. I will pose the same to Rhoda and say, are there gaps in the voices and the knowledges themselves
Absolutely
that should be incorporated in this text that we talk about?
Sure. Well, I'm going to respond with a story. I was working with one of my closest students in Kailicha maybe a few years ago, and I had to ask her to please explain to the people that we were working with what we were trying to do. Now, we were trying to basically just look if fynbos species could be intercropped with in a residential agroecological system, and can the fynbos species help the crop species to grow better? Having listened to Sonwabile explain all of this to the grandmother that we were talking to, I realized that for the first time in my 20-year career, I was listening to my own science for the first time in isiXhosa. And that made me realize that in my classroom, I'm not hearing my Tswana, Pedi, Sesotho speakers. I'm hearing English and Afrikaans speakers a lot. But just the languages is what I think is sometimes missing, because with the language comes an entire knowledge system, an entire way of thinking and being in the world. And I've started to think about how I can use AI in my classroom, for instance, to assess. I'm sure that if you ask me to write in my second language, Afrikaans, I would write a very different response than I would in my first language, English. And I can just imagine how for my Tswana student who's now writing about succulent poaching in the Northern Cape, how it is for her to produce a thesis. And I wonder what it would sound like and feel like, and how I would understand it differently if I was listening to her in her first language, which is a barrier that I cannot overcome unless I learn Tswana myself. And even so, I'm divorced from the culture. So I think that's a big gap in language in South Africa because of mother tongue education at lower levels. We are missing out on a massive contribution from the continent because our languages are not strongly represented in science and in the literature, as Jenny was just, Debbie was saying.
Thanks, Rhoda. I think I'll pose the same to George before I come back to the agriculture colleagues with a slightly different question in that line of thinking. George?
It works. So I'm just going to fill the gaps on what Rhoda has said, especially because we're in the Eastern Cape and this is a closer part of the country. One thing I do in my class in nature conservation is I try, and this because I wrote my PhD thesis on interactive governance systems. So I work with customary and statutory systems and how they interact. And I have this case study that I explore every semester with my students, which we're looking at conservation laws as well as customary systems that have conservation implications. For example, the issue of umajola. I hope lots of people in the audience understand that. Yes, so that is and I think it's a snake, the mole snake. It enjoys protection based solely on that belief system, something that which National Environmental Management Act, NIMPA, NEMBA, etc., would fall short because they would need to be enforced proactively. But a belief system that believes that that particular species should not be harmed, should be left to on its own and live when it does live, just that alone protects it, and that's a conservation outcome of drawn from a cultural or belief system. We also explore other issues where we try to juxtapose, the recent example I used was just a random name, like Umhlawiyalingana in KZN. And what that does is I had few students who come from that part of the country, and all of a sudden they jump up, they become alert, and they feel like the discussion, whatever the case study is, and examples that we draw from these otherwise forgotten places in classrooms are relevant and applicable to them. And I thought that is helpful in terms of enabling students, or perhaps allowing students to imagine that which they've been taught based on their own lived experiences, and therefore they could contribute to be it the discussion or the learning process or the teaching and learning in the classroom. I think I'll just pause there.
Thank you. Thank you, George, for that contribution. Let's just now check with my colleagues in agriculture. I know they've advanced quite a bit to include the South African situation. I wonder if this situation can assist someone from Uganda, for example. And also, while they are thinking around closing this gap in texts and contexts of these agricultural practices, I wonder what support is needed for you to complete this kind of work as well. So I'll start with my colleague here, my very new colleague in the faculty, just to tie that gap. Although it might help the South African students, what about the African student who comes here to study agriculture? And what kind of support is required at the level of university even? Prof. Kiet was here. What is needed for the agricultural department to start to produce these texts that are required to teach in this context? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Prof. And yes, I'm very much new in, and but let me then try to think more broadly now, just escaping only from the South African context in terms of the production of food and agricultural practices. And as you're saying that, really, what will the gaps have to be when we have to try and think about someone that's coming, let's say, from Uganda also? I think quite primarily what we can think of is the inclusivity of the diversity of, let's say, foods that we have across the continent, and including those ones obviously in our texts, and now trying to incorporate not only the food itself, but then also languages. So the languages, again, just have to try and broaden up outside of the South African context as well, but also just thinking about, okay, what is it that is what we have as the diversity, the diversification of food systems in an African context. And over and above that, I think if we look also in the agricultural practices themselves and practical and methods that are being implemented to produce the food that we eat, I believe it varies also across within the country and across different countries. So it's also creating certain methods that we can begin to teach our students, which looks at the diversification of all those methods and incorporates them into the textbooks as well. But just over and above that, I'm just going to touch for a few seconds on the actual text, I think, which has been quite a bit of a challenge for us as academics, is what we conceptualized as the African method of, let's say, producing food. It's oftentimes not acceptable in the current systems of publications. So the journals and the publishers, we just need to rethink and try to decolonize the way we think of putting together our knowledge to disseminate to the broader society, so that we can be able at least to put it also on print and communicate to other people. That's just my contribution.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very rich contribution. I had not seen that it goes that far, this problem. That some of the works produced may not align with the thinking of the international world. So that requires work. These are the kinds of things I'm raising. But I'm reminded that I might be running out of time. I wanted to pose one last question, but I will leave it and just wrap up and say, there it is, Lwandile. Such is the way in which our colleagues think of decolonizing natural and agricultural sciences. So I'll leave the audience to imagine what that would look like for physics, mathematical sciences, biochemistry, chemistry, and the rest. So I think in the episode 2 of these talks, we might bring that block to discuss that topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. I'd love to welcome Prof. Kit.
Hi everyone, once again, sorry man, I just thought it would be very strange if I don't give an update of what is happening outside. So these are our students who are struggling with university accommodation. Of course, they certainly have the right and of course also the sense of dignity that they would like to portray in terms of what the lack of accommodation is doing to them and how it affects their life at the university. Now, as you may well know, these are very deep challenges in the university space. The lack of accommodation across our higher education sector, always a challenge. But the VC and the team is now talking to them. So hopefully we'll find a way of solving it within the next, few days. Of course, it's also under very difficult circumstances. But what I thought, just to say, is that if one or two of them would like to speak to this group, that I will offer them that opportunity as well, okay? And that may be perhaps either late today or early tomorrow morning. So I'll take a briefing from the Dean of Students and then see if we can't make just an extra 15-20 minutes for the students to relay their experience and their demands. I said, okay, all right. But for the rest of it, this is actually part of our Africanization and decolonization work, the different types of contradictions we face as a system. Trying to move in particular kinds of directions with the set of material challenges that we're facing on so many fronts. But of course, we can do all of these things at one and the same time. Okay? And that is what the university should do. And we try our best to provide different types of spaces for all kinds of voices and all kinds of precarities to be shared in our space. Okay? So I'll try and work something out as the day progresses. Many thanks for staying the course. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Chendu and team. our take-homes, because we're noting down. We're going to go to the Q&A after the humanities faculties presentations. Wow, I sense the epitomization of being in service to society when the curriculum itself would have immediate reach to the communities in context to our students, but as well sensed the issue of knowledge gaps and Eurocentric knowledge still being present within the science and the work that the science faculty is wanting to do. And the question of reach within our immediate context in Africa, who does this work reach and how does it reach them? How does it work for them? This all goes down to our aspirations of being a dynamic African university recognized for its leadership in generating cutting-edge knowledge for a sustainable future. So with that being said, I would love to hand over to Prof. Masego and the humanities team. Thank you.
Good morning, Molweni. Niyaphila. Enkosi. Let me start off by just acknowledging what has just happened, what Professor Kiet has just done. It was a bit uncomfortable to continue with engagements as if there was nothing happening outside. So I appreciate that. Prof, and I appreciate your sense of allowing students, if they so desire, to come and address this. I think it talks to, as you say, to what the VC talked about and what you and others have talked about outside of this space as well. So thank you very much. Today, as a Faculty of Humanities, I'm Pamela Masego, by the way. I'm the Dean of the Humanities Faculty. Today, we share some of the initiatives we've undertaken in the faculty in our learning and teaching, research and innovation, and engagement and transformation portfolios, where we're foregrounding Africanization and decolonization. I'm with a team of my colleagues, and they've been deliberately identified, not for anything other than for us to showcase the face of the faculty, specifically the youthness of the faculty, and most of them are those who led in the Fees Must Fall movement, or not only led but were vocal in the Fees Must Fall movement in their various spaces. So what we're sharing is in the context of our strategic imperative of the revitalization of the humanities. And I'm not going to talk today about revitalization of the humanities, but I hope that in our engagement with you today, the revitalization will emerge in what will be discussed here. Our point of departure, departure in our work in the humanities is that colonization was enabled and continues to be sustained through systematic and deliberate obliteration of Africa's history, of Africa's knowledge, and of Africa's languages. And note that we're saying it was systematic. You probably all know that it was not just by accident. It was systematic, it was deliberate. So as humanities faculty, we're adopting the same measures of being intentional, of being deliberate in us turning things around. It's hundreds and hundreds of years of colonization, and it's gonna take a long time for us to be able to do this. But at least there's evidence that the needle is starting to shift, even if it's a little bit. I'm not going to read the slides. I hope you're going to be able to capture these. I just want, our work in the faculty centers around strategic thematic areas that were adopted in 2021. And these are derived from the institutional strategic themes. And the first one is African Vernacular Archive and Heritage Studies. The second is Women's Digital Archive and Gendered Histories, Digital Humanities, Public Management, Governance and Leadership, Arts and Entrepreneurship, Identities and Social Cohesion, Ocean Cultures and Heritage. Today, we're focusing on 4 of those. And I know that there's been in our first presentation, Michelle, when we talked about AI, it reminded of the work we're doing in the faculty that we've showcased in the universities as well on digital humanities. So today we're talking about the African Vernacular Archive, and that is mainly driven by, or rather it's presented here by Dr. Vusumuzi Khumalo and Chanel van der Merwe. And we're going to also be talking about the arts and entrepreneurship, and mainly arts, and it is Rachel Colette, and Women Digital Archive and Gendered Histories, and Simran Juglal. And of course, Dr. Denver will be talking about Africanizing and decolonizing our engagement practices in the faculty and making an example of what they are doing in sociology. And now I'm going to hand over to our next speaker, Chanel van der Merwe, who's going to be addressing us on issues of politics of language, knowledge, and power in Africa.
Thank you so much, Prof. Maseko. So yeah, decolonization is defined differently across various geopolitical locations. In the humanities, we focus specifically on recentering Africa, its epistemologies, its ontologies, its experiences. And this includes the daily lived realities of violence. I just wanted to acknowledge that given what we are experiencing at the moment and that we are not in a virtual reality in this room. So I want to talk about language, and I want to talk about it in 4 ways. How are we thinking about it? What are we doing about it? What are we seeing, and are we seeing different resources in our language? And then also then how do we then speak about, what is the vocabulary that we use to speak about our language? So decolonizing the philosophy of language is important because we need to understand what does language look like from here, and I'm quoting Ratele. So linguistics as a discipline had a huge effect on shaping language, shaping how we think about language in the Global South. So it's an important question to ask, what is language in Africa? And then by that standard, what is multilingualism in Africa? So that's an important starting point because it shifts thinking about language from this discrete bounded entity to fluid entities. Why? Because if you think about language in discrete entities, it closes down our lived experiences, right? Similarly, in Africa, we approach language from an embodied perspective, and we approach language from a multiple perspective. Language is not decontextualized. Language and being human intersect with one another. This is very different from the way in which language is studied within the field of linguistics. As such, having that philosophy of language underpinning our understanding of language is extremely important. And this has implications, obviously, for language policy and for the research that we do. So how are we then doing it? When we say we're decolonizing language policy, this is the way in which we are doing language. So what are we doing about it? So in a post-apartheid South Africa, unfortunately, this philosophy of language of viewing it as something that is embodied did not filter into our educational systems. So there was a focus in our language policies to focus on teaching African languages, but not resourcing the African language speaker as an expert in their own language, right? So what happened was there was a focus on language as a tool, not language as a source of knowledge, right? And that has then filtered into even the way we speak about it now. So when we then talk about language policy, even in our university, we shifted to focus on cognition, the effect that language has on cognition, not just language as this tool that we use to communicate, right? What effect does it have on cognition? Worldviews, right? How does it shift our worldviews? And this has implications for for seeing. So if we are saying that we are shifting our language focus, and when we're saying that language is embodied, we are shifting it to this cognitive realm. We are invested in the ways in which language shift, the ways in which we see the world, the way in which it constructs reality. What are the resources that we have? What are we seeing? So the excavation of African thought in African languages is very important, and this is central to decolonizing language in Africa. Because what it says is that there is an intersection between language and knowledge. Language is not just this thing that exists, right, outside of it being a knowledge project. So the excavation of African thoughts in African languages points to, allows for alternative worldviews to be produced. And this allows for pluriversal knowledge frameworks to be produced. But in order to answer this question, we need to ask ourselves, who do we consider intellectuals? And what do we consider our archives, right? And this is a very loaded question that, that my colleague will also answer here. So in producing these resources, what we have seen is that what Professor Seko is showing here is that when we delve into the resources that we have, when we look at the text of African intellectuals, it has implications not just for linguistics. It has implications for gender, for history, for botany, for linguistics, for anthropology. So it also transgresses the way in which we think about disciplines, right? So what I'm trying to get at is that decolonizing language is not just about language, right? And then lastly, we need to talk about how the vocabulary that we are using to frame our struggle, right? So when we are saying we want to decolonize language, we want to have decolonial languages in the university, how are we talking about it? Just in the previous slide, Prof, we tend to speak about we want to intellectualize African languages. It's already there, right? It was de-intellectualized. We are now re-intellectualizing it. And I think this is a very important point. And when I'm speaking about this entire section here are vocabulary that was introduced by our own Prof. Maseko, right? The way in which we then frame our struggle, the narratives that we use to frame our language project. Similarly, we speak about African languages as sources of knowledge, right? And this is something that we have done in policy and also in the resources that we are producing. I want to speak about the next slide, but I'll leave it there and I'll move on to my colleague.
Thank you. Dr. Vusikhumalo.
Oh, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. As Prof said, I'm Vusikhumalo, and I'm just going to give a talk on how, you know, the university, particularly humanities and historical studies, and how are we battling to defend and revive our Afrocentric point of view through humanities. So one cannot actually present this without referring back to history, because everything, as we are sitting here, we are shaped by history. So I would go back to the time when the world was separated, when Indians were in India, when Africans were still living in Africa. And my main concern here is the ways in which people conceive and question the existence of their universe, how the world view, how people view the world, and how that influence the production of knowledge today, and the way we think, and the way the archival records are created. Because now, in order to grapple and have an answer towards how people should understand themselves, how should we change the archive, we need to look at these two battles of knowledge, whereby the Western knowledge dominated the African knowledge, and how the Western knowledge attack oral traditions, which are the cornerstone of African survival. And how Christianity itself dominated and played a role to erase what we call oral traditions. Because as we are sitting today, our children, they don't know, African children, they don't know their language, firstly. They can't speak. we as parents, we are taking our children to the former, white schools, that is Model C schools. And you see people today are wearing weaves, hang on. Look, you cannot run away, it's history. It's all centered up around the production of knowledge and the worldview, whereby one would see himself as ugly if not wearing a certain thing that beautifies him or herself. Even with male, we are always on chiscop because we seem not to like our hair. Apparently, I'm not sure. So anyway, it's all about the archives and the worldview. For example, when we look back into African oral traditions, Africans had their own way of interpreting the origins of humankind. I'm always teaching my students that there's a battle of knowledge. We don't know today how Africans interpreted the origins of humankind. I began now to revitalize our old oral traditions as archives, as the tool of teaching our children, decolonizing their mind. Because what is important at the moment, it's the mind. The colonizers were so smart. They sent an explorer. And an explorer was followed by a missionary. And the missionary was followed by the soldier. So these guys, they never just came and overthrow, or they studied these Africans, and they look at what makes them strong. They look at their oral traditions. Then they then sit down and crafted a strategy on how to do away with these oral traditions before they took land. Because even land itself, it's a very important resource which is associated with cultural landscape, which now we realize that we could also use that cultural landscape as an archive. For example, when you take an old man, you put him in a cultural landscape, he sees the mountain, he sees the rivers, he can tell you the story and reconstruct the past through interpreting what we call cultural landscape. But now, if you don't have land, if your land was invaded, if you want to go and pray up on the mountain, how would you pray? How would you connect with your ancestors on the cave while that place is being demarcated as a private property? So that takes us back now to the concept of land, because there's a clash on the concept of land ownership between Africans and the Europeans. It's the same as religion. Now the question is, how can we use what one would say it's a neglected archive, which was not even protected by the National Monuments Council?
Dr. Khumalo, what I'm going to do, it's very important, the questions you're raising. I hope that we pick them up during the questioning time. I just don't want us to lose an opportunity of hearing from the other three. Okay. Just at the back to know that we started 7 minutes late. And so I know that they've been waiving the time. Just want to hand over to Simran. Thank you so much, Dr. Khumalo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Maseko. Good morning, everyone. My name is Simran, and I am from the Center for Women and Gender Studies. At the Center, we seek to promote attitudinal and social transformation through women's empowerment, gender equality, and gender equity. And we are also very much focused on mainstreaming women and gender studies in the curriculum design, teaching and learning, research, and scholarly engagements at Nelson Mandela University. And then one of our objectives is to build institutional, regional, national, and international capacity to support gender advocacy in South Africa and beyond. So at the Center for Women and Gender Studies, we are housed under the Engagement and Transportation and Transformation portfolio, and we are also host to the Saatchi Chair in African Feminist Imagination. And what the Center and the Chair is focused on is creating a gender corridor in the Eastern Cape by revitalizing the humanities and turning Nelson Mandela University into an intellectual hub for decolonization, African feminism, and gender and queer justice. When it comes to digital archives and gendered histories, the Center and the African Feminist Imagination Chair, we work towards highlighting the women who have been deliberately erased in South African history and African history. So when we talk about gendered histories, we refer to a history that is gender conscious and that understands the ways in which gender influences and is influenced by culture, beliefs, traditions, practices, norms, and institutions. And we explore how and why gender norms are developed, challenged, interpreted, reworked, and reaffirmed. So in our acknowledgement of women's intellectual, artistic, and activist contributions to society, the Center and the AfDeP Chair highlight and preserve these women and their contributions, but we also seek to spark intergenerational discussions, debates, and conversations on how we can look to our pasts to develop a more just and equitable future for women, for queer peoples, and for people with disabilities. So the Chair and the Center translate gendered histories into practice through a series of gender mapping and transformation projects. We have our Author Friday series where we launch books and have roundtable discussions. We have partnerships with other universities, both national and international. We also form collaborations with nonprofit organizations, and we work on curriculum transformation. So 2 key projects of the Center include the Gender Mapping Project and the Master of Arts Gender Studies program. When it comes to the Gender Mapping Project, we are creating a database for Nelson Mandela University that looks across the various faculties and departments to see how gender is being taught in the curriculum or the ways in which gender studies is being excluded from the curriculum. And then, of course, when it comes to gender studies, we also focus on the way gender intersects with race, ethnicity, religion, nationality, language, age, etc. And then we are also involved in creating 2 new master degrees. These are Master of Arts degrees that focus specifically on gender studies. So as we develop these 2 degrees, one is a coursework degree and the other one is a research degree, we are making Nelson Mandela University the first institution in the Eastern Cape to offer 2 master's degrees that are solely focused on gender. We also host inaugural public lectures where we commemorate the activist and intellectual work of women in South African history who do not get the spotlight that they deserve. For example, Dr. Bragali Abam, who was the chairperson of the IEC in the late 1990s. We also commemorate activists such as Prudence Mabele and Phyllis Ntantala. And one of our most important projects at the Center is the Author Friday series, where we bring together students, community members, writers, and academics to talk about a range of issues on or related to gender, such as post-intersectionality, Black decolonial feminism, looking at the history of guerrillas and combative mothers during the struggle. And we also look at masculinity and violent masculinities, as well as Black intimacy in South Africa. So that's the work of the Center and the Chair. So we hope to see you guys at our next event.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Rachel, Colette?
Hello. Okay. I won't be able to, comprehensively reflect the work that's going on in our department and our school, but I'm just going to offer a brief reflection on interdisciplinarity and its role in decolonisation. So historically speaking, artists and designers have got quite a complex relationship to institutions. creativity thrives outside the academy as much as within it, sometimes more. I would say that, we have one of the most progressive and interesting art scenes in South Africa that is, globally. And I'm not an expert in this, but I'd hazard to say the same for theatre and literature. And why we have that is that new genres are constantly emerging that emerge from the interplay between existing things. So new forms come into the world catalyzed by artists' most burning questions as they give shape to their field of concern. The connections made within them as whole people, as socially, culturally, politically and historically situated subjects. And yet the disciplinary boundaries that we work within, that are outlined in the perspective and apportioned their number of credits and notional hours, the discipline of, for example, applied design versus fine art, the siloed subjects of theory and practice, these kinds of sort of institutional guidelines continually draw us back to reproducing existing standards of excellence and existing industry expectations, rather than daring to chart out what is new and risky. So following this line of thinking, the challenge to inherited colonial architecture that we need to transform our course is at the level of disciplinary boundaries and pedagogical practice as much as it is of curriculum and content. And one very dynamic intervention into our curriculum was something called the CoLab project. So in this project, you'll see on the screen students working within the gallery space that we have in Bird Street and transforming that gallery space for the space of 2 weeks into a multidisciplinary workshop space in which students produced outstanding work that was really produced in quite an exceptionally short time frame, but using available materials and other modalities that they weren't necessarily familiar with, so using things that were at hand to comment on diverse issues that were the burning questions for them. And really, so what we did here that was so different was that we brought in people whose practices embodied these ways of teaching, artists like Zitembile Msizane. Some of you may know her work that she did where she photographed herself at the feast, at the removal of the Cecil John Rhodes statue at UCT as that amazing bird that she performed at. In any case, so what her practice with our students introduced was we had a multilingual soundscape in the classroom for the first time, where she had students teaching each other songs and games. And this was really interesting because this raised a lot of important issues. There was quite a lot of discomfort, around bringing these kinds of things in. There was a question of, student agency in these spaces. There was a question of staff lived experience being adequate or inadequate to sort of advise these kind of processes. There was a discomfort with a more embodied experiential way of teaching, and there was very real concerns about time away from developing technical expertise and time out of an already packed curriculum. Resource disparity came to the fore, and the need for bodily safety and basic needs to be met. So we were able to see these and meet these to an extent, and that meant for a kind of leveling of sorts. So these moments of puncture to the condition of coloniality were discarded with relief by many, but when they ended, but they've had a surprising afterlife in the memory of students years later. So that's one example. Then what I have on the screen now is another example that it also exemplifies a shift worth noting. This is Tsatsang Pomotse's sculpture that he made at the end of last year, and in his work you can see that his material choices of his transformed little pieces of found paper to produce a really intense and poignant reflection on society. So he's taken here as his subject a young man who was burnt in the process of cable theft. This man was on fire, and then the fire was put out by residents who subsequently burned him to death when they discovered why he was on fire. So this incredibly complex thing that happened has been here given form using the materials that the student had at hand and that he would take to the gallery to work with in a black plastic bag on a taxi.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry.
No, I'm finished.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Dr. Denver Davids, thank you.
Okay, good. Well, it's afternoon already. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Prof. Maseko. Colleagues, I think for the sake of time, I'm going to start with my conclusion, which is 2 points. Number one is purposeful inclusion and capacity enhancement. Right? So I'm afraid my slides are not as fancy. I'm an anthropologist, so my slides are really not as...
I can showcase the fancy ones.
No, the fancy ones. So, Prof is also wanting me to go to the conclusion. But yes, colleagues, the work that is being done in sociology and anthropology, as well as the faculty and especially the School of Government and Social Sciences, is centered around IKS. It is one of our strategic focus areas. And my work in particular focuses on the use of traditional medicine, right? So we start off with the premise that, of course, we all know that traditional medicine was subjugated in the past, and that especially in terms of practice, it was allowed to operate and exist so long as it did not infringe on the boundaries of Western medicine, allopathic medicine, or Western science, right? And since 1994, and especially in relation to policy, since 2004, we see an increased recognition in relation to the value of IKS. I think this is very well represented in some of the items that I've seen in our program for the next 2 days, where we have colleagues from the sciences talking about the inclusion and the study of medicinal plants. And so when I examine 3 policies in particular, the Traditional Health Practitioners Act, Traditional Medicines Act, as well as the Development and Management of Indigenous Knowledge Act of 2019, and I'm going to say something slightly controversial, is that when I examine these acts, I see that the representation of traditional medicine is somewhat repetitive. Right? And what I mean with that is, especially in terms of language use, right? It is being traditional medicine, IKS, it is recognized, it should be promoted, it should be documented. There should be some form of inclusion around traditional medicine and IKS just broadly. But when I look at the language, I still see traditional medicine and its practitioners as something that exists in parenthesis. Something that exists in a sort of backdrop to other affairs, the sciences, its use value in terms of economy, right? And so how do we approach this in terms of an engagement perspective, right? Especially in terms of some of the work that I've done in laboratories, in other settings. Scientists are very much interested. We need to engage with traditional health practitioners, but we'll collect plants from them, we'll show them our laboratories, and then that's where it stops, So, next slide, please, Prof. So, it is from this sort of perspective that the school, the faculty, as well as our department has really looked at 2 sort of focus areas, and that is the way that we include indigenous peoples, right? And traditional knowledge in our community engagement activities. So the first that I want to reflect on, I know I've already spoken 5 minutes, Prof, but if I may just, I want to really, is one project. Prof Mkhize, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but the RunX project, which I've been very excited about, and I want to commend Prof Mkhize for the way in which she asked me to engage in that particular project a year ago. So what got me really excited about it was, she said to me that we've got this group of Khoisan youth, She did not come to me and say, go and teach them about ethnobotany, or go and teach them about the documentation of traditional knowledge. But what she said to me was, they've got ideas about their own histories, about their own knowledge. So how can we develop a framework, and how can we capacitate them so that they can make use, they can document, they can engage with their own knowledge on their own terms, which has been really exciting for us, and this is part of why I've been so excited. I think I've been asking Prof Mkhize since January, I've got so many ideas. I want to show them how to make soap from traditional medicine, how to extract oils, make lotions, so that we can include some kind of entrepreneurship element in that engagement, but that is not vested in us. But that they have their own sort of reciprocities of these knowledge. The second is a project that is just starting up, and I see some of the colleagues working on that one here, is the reviving of the medicinal garden at the medical school, right? And again, I just want to point out one important aspect of this engagement, which is that when the colleague from the medical school came to visit me about a year ago, she was very excited about, reviving the medicinal garden, but she was also very emphatic about the fact that there was a group of traditional healers who were involved in that project from the start, and there can be no reviving of the medicinal garden without including them, right? So in conclusion, colleagues, 2 points. The first is that in terms of IKS and how we've engaged our local communities, is that we've tried to be purposeful about including local people in their own sort of problems and questions that they are facing. And secondly is we've tried to engage with the notion of capacity enhancement. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving us the time. I just hope that we're able to illustrate through the inputs from the various colleagues how we're responding to what we think underpins coloniality, which is historicide, linguicide, and epistemicide. I hope we're able to illustrate that. But what is really important that began to emerge already is that we're not only doing that for the sake of doing it, but we're also, in the process, attempting to find or to develop hypotheses which can then develop into theories that are grounded in Africa, that are rooted that derive from African experience. So I'm hoping we're able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do the summary I wish for, but I wish to acknowledge the directors of school who are here, Professor Marius, I see him, Kraus, Professor Peter Binsberg, and Prof Mkhize was stuck outside. Oh, okay. I've been trying to find it, and Professor Nomalanga Mkhize from the School of Government and Social Science. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much, Prof. We're going to jump into the Q&A. Take home from the humanities faculty. There is a deliberate flipping of the coin on whose history counts and whose history matters. And whose knowledge counts in relation to language, the mattering of knowledge, whose knowledge matters indeed. With gendered histories, there is work done to undo the erasure and the invisibility, and taking it to visibility, recognition, voice, and expression. Then thank you so much. As we go to the Q&A, there is a golden thread here across all the faculties. The golden thread is this. As the VC would say in an inaugural speech, faculties are doing the work as the VC
Thank you very much, colleagues. My name is Masikole from Rhodes University. My question is directed to humanities. Prof. Maseko, I know most of the colonial relation with language, even Kwesi Kwapra mentioned the centrality of African languages in decolonization process. But my question is, do we develop postgraduate students from honors, masters, and PhD to write in their African languages? Because for me, this is very important, both for undergrad tutoring, for assessment. So, I mean, most of the time we say the centrality of African languages, but you find out honors to PhD level. So that's the first question. But quickly, last question, I mean, directed to Dr. Ngomezulu. I mean, black existential crisis, I mean, affects both men and women. And I mean, it's easy for black men, you know, to talk about weaves. But we know black men don't feel beautiful and comfortable with their own hair. They are always on chiscop because they believe that they are not beautiful or clean with their African hair. I mean, this is part of colonization, of inferiority complex, that we don't feel beautiful with ourselves. So I mean, this is a complex black existential aesthetics, and I mean, we must find a way to self-introspect. That why are we not feeling comfortable with our own hair? And I'm sure Dr. Mgomezulu looks beautiful and cute with his own hair. And I assume he can do that. Thank you very much.
It's like you punching hard on me. I had hair like yours for a very long time. We're going there. Azile, we're going to Prof there. Yes. You can say, yes, you can say.
Thanks, Prof. I don't have a single question for anybody, but I would have liked to talk about the kinds of questions the discussion has raised for this conference. I don't know whether that's permissible, because it's not a single question.
How many are those? If you can condense them so that it doesn't take a lot of our time, please.
Well, I want to firstly say thank you very much that this conference has been organized, and I look there at the motif which suggests that this is about changing the world also. And for each session, for me, there were a number of very important issues which I hope at some stage can be discussed more fully, because I don't think there's been, I'm not criticizing the organizers, but I just want to point to the fact that there just isn't enough time to have a deeper discussion about the kinds of issues which I think this conference is raising. There's no question about it. It's raising these questions, but we don't have the time. For instance, if I were to speak to, in the last three groups, and I'll come to the organizing of this conference, I would have asked the IT group, the group that dealt with 4I, and I carry telephones. I'm not a Luddite. I would have asked them what they thought about Oppenheimer's pronouncements about, now I have become the destroyer of worlds. Given the fact that 90% of the global communication systems are owned by two companies, BlackRock and Vanguard, and in fact, their total assets exceed 18 trillion US dollars. What do they think about the fascism that is rampant in the way in which these communication giants control the media in this world? What do they think about the technological diffusion that is losing us millions of jobs in this world. I would have asked the people in science what they thought about the underlying philosophy of science which they hope to promote in this university, barring the wonderful work they are doing to showcase the importance, the critical importance of indigenous knowledge systems. Because it's not enough simply to develop a set of practices without providing a framework within which these practices, we in universities call it theorization or conceptualization. Without that, practices are wonderful, but they are inadequate because they don't answer the kind of questions about what exactly is our relationship to the Linnaean classification system. What exactly do we understand by scientism? What do we understand by the effects of the resurgence of sociobiology at this very moment? I would have asked the people, I would have asked for a discussion, because these are not just questions I have an answer to. In the last group about Nabudere's concept of transdisciplinarity, which goes beyond multi and other formulations of disciplinarity. I would have asked them about what they think about the kind of epistemic paternalism that we in universities are guilty of in dealing with communities outside the university. I would have asked right at the beginning, for instance, right at the beginning, and this is a wonderful university, because unlike other universities I'm familiar with, the freedom to express one's views is deeply valued by the Vice-Chancellor and the leadership of this university. It's very different in other places where there are so many prescriptions. But I would have asked how exactly some of our postmodern approaches to questions, the perpetual relativism about knowledge, which does not lead to the need for making real choices in this world, whether we can be perennially relativistic and ask and say to everyone, there is no methodological prescription about what exactly values and principles and how these must be promoted. I would have asked the organizers of this conference, finally, I would have asked the organizers of this conference, given the world we're living in right now and witnessing, this is the most, at this moment, we have the most egregious exemplification of colonization in what is happening not only in Palestine, where we are now witnessing genocide in addition to racism, land occupation, the etc., Zionism, etc. But not only in Palestine, but in East Central Africa, in West Africa, in Sudan, in Myanmar, in Haiti, etc. Was this conference on decolonization and changing the world, what was the organizers' orientation to these large demonstrative questions? Because otherwise our examination of decolonization will remain entirely historical and theoretical.
Thank you.
No, we have to go beyond that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the speakers. I have a question for, I think it's the Faculty of Business. They spoke about the proliferation of artificial intelligence and all the beautiful things that it comes with. And at the Faculty of Humanity, our direction in terms of artificial intelligence is human-centric. So before we look at the technology, we look at the impact the technology will do to the person. So they made mention about a tablet that is given to students in rural communities that has learning management systems and all those things. So I'm curious as to, given the LTE infrastructure of South Africa, how are they connecting those tablets in those rural communities? And given the level of unemployment that exists in society, I mean, in Gauteng, there was a school that was built with computers, and the next day it was ransacked, and the computers were stolen. How are they ensuring that in providing access to those technologies to those that actually need it, that they do the best that they can to ensure that the accessibility does not come with proliferating certain problems? So what is the human element in terms of the technology that they're speaking of in this platform? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's you, sir. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Mine is a quick one. I think there is consensus generally that as part of the decolonization project and Africanization, we must give currency to Africa's oral traditions. I don't think that's anyone who would sensibly argue against that. But I was quite interested, Dr. Kumalo, in your example about Christianity and oral traditions, your proposition that Christianity is somehow responsible for destroying Africa's oral traditions. And I found that quite curious because, and also this is a caution. I mean, it can be argued that, oral tradition has been, the primary mode of transmitting knowledge in the continent. But it may not necessarily be true that this is something that we own and it's unique to us. I think that's, evidence suggests otherwise. And I was quite curious with that proposition, that it has destroyed Africa's oral traditions, because if you look at the canon itself, the canon text, most of it comes from oral traditions. So how do you navigate that contradiction? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I would love to suggest that faculties who will members of faculty who would be answering, maybe they would send a presentation or they want to answer all of them, but they can go on answering because we cannot accommodate everyone. Those that will have the task of answering the cues, maybe they can join on the stage because we cannot accommodate all three panels. And I would love to also put Prof's questions, some of them questions, though he says he doesn't have answers, I think some of them would have been directed to faculty members as well. Maybe they should so attempt to answer those questions, because after that we should go straight to lunch. Thank you so much, colleagues. You can come. Prof. Maseko. Do you want to come, all of you guys? No. If one of you wants to come, they can join Prof. Masego on the stage. Thank you so much. Okay, Prof. Can we please try to be sweet and precise. Oh, you can stand.
Okay, thanks, colleague, for that question. I think here there's a problem of presenting oral traditions as African, overlooking the fact that this is cross-cultural. Even Christianity and the Bible itself, it's oral tradition of the Western people. Because it's all about myth. It's all about answering some questions that are unanswerable in the universe. For example, about the origins of man, about the origins of the earth. Western people, they've got their own interpretation, which is Christianity, which was opposed by Charles Darwin. And we, as Africans, we've got our own way of answering questions about the origins of man. So I think the issue of terminology and how English is presented, because we are using English, and it's driven by people who are producing knowledge and who are shaping us on how should we think. So, So oral tradition in Christianity, I would argue and say it's one thing. In the Western world, it's called Christianity. In the African cosmology, because of, people who are owning the language, it's oral traditions.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Doc.
Hi. The question, I think the main question is on language from me. I want to start off by just saying Nelson Mandela University and the Faculty of Humanities produced thesis or postgraduate work written in isiXhosa about 20 years ago. So when other universities started to really jump into the bandwagon, the university had already started with that. And it was mainly in disciplines where the language is taught, so in isiXhosa. We continue to do that, but what the change now in the faculty is that we are passing proposals, research proposals, that are in disciplines other than isiXhosa. But I just want to caution us around that, because often when we talk in celebration of these works, Masitole, we talk about the language. We talk about Rhodes University, PhD students writing in isiXhosa, UCT, Nelson Mandela. For me, this is not what we should be celebrating, because we don't celebrate a thesis written in English or Afrikaans. But the questions we ask around those theses is that what new knowledge has emerged, and how is it contributing to knowledge that exists in that sphere of knowledge. So I think those are the critical questions that we must be asking if we are going to highlight the value that is important in writing in African languages. My colleagues, I chair the postgraduate studies committee in the faculty, and the critical question I ask, the people here will know, for a proposal written in isiXhosa, and I'm saying, what is new? What knowledge is embedded? So we cannot be correcting the grammar, we cannot be correcting the style, but we should be asking critical questions that we will be asking in a study written in psychology, in physics, and so forth. So I think that is what is important, because as has been indicated here earlier on, language is not just a means of communicating knowledge. The knowledge systems of the people is embedded in the language. So if we start to unearth that, so for instance, Chanel highlighted the works of the African intellectuals writing in isiXhosa. So we cannot be celebrating that Mkai wrote in isiXhosa. We cannot be laughing at the fact that he said, ukubandi ndifundisa ngesiXhosa ukutyala ikhaphetshu. Ezikhaphetshu azokhula just because ndifundisa ngesiXhosa. So we should be highlighting what intellectual traditions, the thoughts, the knowledge that is embedded in these, so that we begin to really diversify the canon. I think that is the ultimate purpose of what we're doing in the archival work of the faculties.
Thank you, Prof. Prof. Chin, to then Prof. May.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. Before I go into this issue of philosophizing around what Prof raised, around how science sees itself in dealing with the question, perhaps you can allow me to make a comment to one of the humanities colleagues, Denver Davids. If he's
I should not be killed for taking people's lunchtime away. So you can sit and short.
Something very important.
Yes,
this
bro.
university received a proposal from the Stearman, David Stearman sort of foundation, which is a family trust of some sort, for us to host the IKS Center. I see him talk about that. He's engaged in that. And that proposal came to science, and we said this is too broad for science. We only fit in the innovation aspect of extracting those oils and making those cosmetics, etc., etc. So I wonder if that proposal ever made its way to humanities, because it was as broad as that, and we felt that we could not take that center on ourselves. So perhaps outside of this, we can continue that particular discussion. But coming to the question itself, of course, I think colleagues in science struggle with a lot of things at a practical level. I've got my HOD here in microbiology who would ask me, Prof. Chentu, how do you decolonize microbiology? Tell me. So colleagues struggle with practical ways to do this. So we're comfortable, Prof, to start there, to say let the people explore as much as possible, and from that we can sort of organize what are the principles that are coming out of this. So we find it very difficult to start on philosophizing around what we want to be as a decolonial science faculty. In fact, Nomalanga challenged us to do exactly that when he visited us in one of the strategic sessions. She said, you need to have a position as science. How are you going to deal with this? So it's the same question, but we would prefer to explore first and then have organizing principles that lead to a framework. Then we'll understand the question very well for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Prof. May?
Okay, so now I'm officially the only thing standing between you and lunch. Okay, so just in terms of the question about the tablets, that was what GenderMark is doing in terms of what they're using their expertise for in helping to uplift education. So that's not something that the business school's doing or the business faculty, it's what GenderMark was doing. And if we had more time, we would have gone into that. In terms of the human aspect, Grant did allude to the research that we're doing with AfDeP. So AfDeP has come out with that 6-minute or 6.5-minute assessment, and out of that, 3 reports, psychometric reports, get produced. And we're going to be checking for bias, we get checking for reliability and validity of that system. So that's the role that we play in terms of the human element, if that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, colleagues and everyone, for being patient with me from 10:30 up to now. I think it's safe to say we can now go to lunch. Before we go to lunch, colleagues that will be on the faculty session 2, can they presenting there? Can they please remain on the venue? Thank you so much. Thank you.